Hi everybody, Crista Cowan here with another episode of One Question with the Barefoot Genealogist. This week's question is a question that we get asked a lot. A lot of people have family stories or even some documentation or pictures that lead them to believe that they have Native American or Indian ancestry. And the question is, how do you prove that? Now, I was just reading some statistics, and you know how statistics go, but the statistic was that if you had ancestors in the United States as early as the early 1800s, around 1800, 1810, that there is a 50% chance that at least one of your ancestors is Native American. That was something that I didn't know before I started preparing for this. I had done some Native American research, and so I know some of the tips and tricks and some of the ins and outs, but that was kind of an interesting tidbit for me. Now, one of the premier resources for Native American information, even currently today, is the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And they have a website. That website is BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs.gov. And I just pulled a little something off their website that I want to share with you because I think it's kind of interesting. They said, here's why people want to know about their ancestry. Some people want to become enrolled members of a federally recognized tribe. Others just want to verify a family tradition, whether it's a belief, fact, or fiction, passed from generation to generation, that they descend from an American Indian either in their distant or recent past, while others just want to learn more about the people they descend from. And then they talk about the process of doing genealogy, and we'll talk about some of that today. And then they say this, and I love this, they say, when people believe they may be of American Indian ancestry, they immediately write or telephone the nearest Bureau of Indian Affairs office for information. That is not the best place to start. Many people think that the BIA retrieves genealogical information from a massive national Indian registry or comprehensive computer database. This is not true. So, with that little bit of an introduction, let's just dive into a few quick tips and then some resources that are available for you, at least as much as we can do in 15 or 20 minutes, to help you verify your Native American ancestry. Now, just like with any genealogy research, the best place to start is with what you know and work your way back in time. If you're brand new to genealogy, of course, that means starting with yourself, collecting information about your birth and marriage, collecting information about your children and their birth, and then moving back to your parents and working your way back through time that way. One of the things that you want to do if you're interested in learning about Native American ancestry is just pay really close attention to some of those clues as you go through that process that may help you later on. Names, there are some very unique names to Native American culture. If you see those cropping up in your family history, that's certainly something to take note of so that you have that readily available. Birthplaces, and we're going to talk a little bit about place here in a minute, but birthplaces and residences, and then race. And race is going to show up on a lot of documents. You just have to look for it sometimes. It's on the census, marked as just a little W in one of those columns we sometimes skip over. Not always are Native Americans marked with an I or an IND for Indian. Sometimes they were listed as white. So don't make that definitive decision based on that race that you see on a document, but certainly use that as a clue. Now, the number two thing you're going to want to do once you have researched back from yourself to the generation that you think or that your family story says is the Native American ancestor or where it comes into the family, you're going to want to learn a little bit about the geographic areas where different Indian tribes lived, and then compare that with where your ancestors lived. So, of course, I, like many people, have stories in my family of Native American ancestry. And when I started overlaying where different Indian tribes lived at different times and where my family lived at those same times, there was a little bit of a disconnect. And so on one of the lines that we thought maybe had some Native American ancestry, it hasn't been proven yet, or certainly not the tribe that it was rumored to be part of, because that tribe was not anywhere near that place. Let me just use one example, and the rest of the examples that I'm going to use today are all from your questions. So if you asked a Native American question specifically using names and information that I could look into, pay attention. I may use your family as an example here. So first you need to know that right now in the United States there are over 550 federally recognized American Indian tribes and Alaska Natives. And they are currently on over 200 or about 280 reservations in the United States. So lots and lots of different possible tribes, lots and lots of different possible locations. But I'm just going to use this example, which is probably the most well-known example. And that's of the 5 civilized tribes. The 5 civilized tribes were the Seminole, the Cherokee, the Creek, the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw. And those tribes, as in 1830, there was an act passed in government, the Indian Removal Act. Some of you may be familiar with the Trail of Tears and the history behind that. And basically what it meant was that those tribes, one at a time, were removed from their native lands into Indian territories west of the Mississippi. So we're going to look specifically at the Choctaw as an example. The Choctaw were the first tribe to be removed. They were removed starting in about 1830, 1831. It's interesting to note they're living here, you can see, in Mississippi and Alabama, and when they were removed, about 17,000 of them moved up here to Indian Territory, into this area that was designated for the Choctaw. About 6,000 of them actually stayed in Mississippi and Alabama. And a lot of them that stayed, they were harassed. There was a lot of persecution. And so many of those who stayed in Mississippi and Alabama tried to mask their Indian heritage. Now, certainly that's a broad generalization, but it was a very common practice. You would need to research your specific family a little bit more to see if that was the case for them. But a lot of the Native Americans from the Choctaw tribe that stayed in Mississippi and Alabama, and there, like I said, there were about 6,000 of them, started assimilating more with the white culture and identifying more, converting into Baptist and Presbyterian religions, going to school and education in the white culture if they could, because of the persecution that they endured when they stayed. Some of them, of course, maintained their identity as Native Americans, and that's fantastic, and there's some records we'll look at that'll help you find them. Again, then 17,000 of them were removed as part of that Trail of Tears into Indian Territory. Now, like I said, this is just one example of one tribe, just to give you an idea of how knowing and understanding the history will help you find your family. So again, you're going to want to pay attention to where your family was in the records you do have available, and were they living in this area of Indian Territory, or were they living in this area of Mississippi and Alabama during the appropriate time period. So pay attention to those things. You can see there are a lot of resources available. I have used this map on many occasions. As a matter of fact, I have family that still lives in some of these places. This is a map of where those civilized tribes were removed to, and it was set up for them as Indian Territory officially in 1834. And then in 1890, as more white settlers moved west, the Oklahoma Territory was carved out of the land that had been allotted for them. And then in 1907, Oklahoma, which included Indian Territory, became a state. And so there are still a lot of Native Americans living in the state of Oklahoma because of this, but again, there's some assimilation that occurred because of that progression through time. 1834, when they became the Indian Territory, 1890 when the Oklahoma Territory was carved out, and then 1907 when it became the state of Oklahoma. So that's just one example of the way in which you can see if your the tribe that you think you're affiliated with is in the same time and place that your family would have been there. And like I said, just one example of that. Okay, the third thing is once you determine or have a general idea of tribal affiliation, now there are some Native American records that you can search, Native American records specifically. Before that, you're going to be doing your searches just like you do all your genealogy searches: vital records, census records, school documents, family Bibles, any kind of personal information that you can glean, just like you would do any other kind of genealogical research. But then we do have some extra resources available for Native American records. There are tribal enrollment records, and these are typically managed by the tribe, and I'll show you some resources to go find those. From about 1827 to now, they still keep those records. There are land allotment records available. So when they were given their allotment of land as part of removal, that land, oftentimes they would list who in the family that land passed to. So those records were kept from 1856 to about 1935. Then there is specifically an Indian census that is from 1885 to 1940, and then those removal records that begin in some places as early as 1815 and go through about 1850. So those are the records, kind of the general records that are available specifically for Native American research. Let me show you how to find a few of those things on Ancestry.com. So when you're on the main search screen here, okay, if you scroll down to the bottom of the search screen, we have this little box called Collection Priority. If you don't see that box, you might want to check and see if this Show Advanced is checked. Just click it, it opens up your box bigger, and now you should have this Collection Priority as an option. Now you'll notice you can set your collection priority based on geographical region. So if I was interested in U.S. records, I could set it to the United States, check Show Only Records from these collections, and then that's the only records I would see. I wouldn't see records from England or Canada when I was doing a search for U.S. records. One of the options also, however, is an ethnic delineation. And Native American is one of the 3 delineations you can make there so that you can surface those records closer to the top. Okay? That'll make sense here in a minute, I hope. So I'm just going to do a quick search here, and I'm going to go directly to the 1900 census, actually. Now, when you are searching in a specific database, one of the things you can do, if you check the search form, is enter a race or a nationality. So the 1900 census is one of those records where that was recorded. So I could actually type in Indian, mark that exact, and click search, and I will only have records returned where the last name is Ward and their racial delineation has been marked as Indian. You'll see there's only 310 of them in the United States, and I can actually come in then and look at one of these records. Now, I'm going to go all the way into this record because there's something a little unique about Indian records on this particular census. You see this top part up here looks just like the 1900 census. But when Native Americans were being enumerated, there was an additional set of inquiries, special inquiries, it says, relating to Indians. I would suggest you read the instructions so that you're familiar with why they were asking those questions and what those questions were that they asked them. And then you'll see information about what tribe they belonged to, if they knew, and there's some controversy with some people about why this is or isn't important, but if they knew, and not all of them did, what percentage Native American blood they had. Anyway, those are just kind of the questions that they asked. Again, read these instructions so that you know what the information is that you're looking at there. Okay, that's one resource. The other resource is my famous card catalog. Okay, again, for those of you who are new to this, hover over search, scroll all the way down to the bottom and click on card catalog. I love it. I use it every day. Okay, once you're in there, what I would recommend doing is in this keyword box, just type the word Indian and see what comes up. This is one of those exploratory experiments. Now, we always sort the card catalog by popularity, which you're welcome to do, or you can sort it by database title or size or whatever. That's up to you, okay? But as you scroll through these, what you'll discover is some really unique data sets. We'll look at a couple of them specifically, but look through that list, see if something catches your attention. If you want to filter it further by location, you can come over here and click on USA, and then say, for example, your Native American ancestry is from the state of Michigan rather than from the southern United States. You can narrow it down that way and see what databases come up based on location. So that's a little exploratory option for you. I mentioned earlier that one of the premier resources for Native American ancestry is the Indian Census. It was taken from 1885 to 1940. Okay, and you can just come in here and put in your family name or as much information as you know. It's just like searching any other census. When you click search, you'll get your search results. And again, if you remember, these are all from examples that people sent me. So I did a little research, and if Mary Caffey Lawrence, there she is. If she is your ancestor, here she is. Okay, you can see there's information here on the index. You can also click through to the image, and what you'll see is these lovely typed documents. This is a 1926 census, and so it was beautifully typed here. You'll see their numbers, their Indian names. If they have an English name, that was included. These relationships in these households, date of birth and gender. So again, terrific, terrific resource to get you a little bit closer to verifying that Native American ancestry. The next database I want to show you is commonly called the Dawes Roll. What the Dawes Roll was is in the late 1800s, there was an enrollment, and this was considered the final enrollment for the 5 civilized tribes. It was named Dawes after the commissioner, I think, at the time, who handled it or oversaw it. What you can see on any database, if you scroll down, is exactly what information was included in the records. So you can see the way that the information was recorded and what some of those initials or acronyms stand for, so that when you're looking at that document, you know what it is. You'll also see what some of the things that were indexed were, so that you know the different ways that you can search. So I suggest always reading these database descriptions before you jump in and just start searching. Now, one of you wrote in and you were looking for a Miller family, a Lucinda Miller. There she is. Okay, so Lucinda Miller, she was born about 1830. At the time of the census, or the enrollment, she was 72 years old. She was enrolled in 1902, and she's listed, her tribal affiliation is listed as Cherokee, and she is Cherokee by blood as opposed to by marriage. And let's see, I found her on here earlier. It's a lot of names. I'm not going to take the time to do that now, but again, this resource is fantastic because so many of the people in the 5 civilized tribes were included in this enrollment. So that's a great resource. Last couple of resources I want to share with you before we run out of time. This is a small collection, but it actually helps solve one of your questions. One of you is asking about a man named William English. Now that sounds like a very white man name. Doesn't sound very Indian, and so there was some question about could this man have been Native American? And with the limited information that I had, I was able to look at this, and I think that I have the right person. And according to this, let's see, just scroll up on the page, I think, to find him. I may have gone the wrong, oh, I went the wrong direction. We're going to see that, oh, here we go, William English. He lists that he is an Oto Indian. He lists his allotment number, where he's living, and then just like any other will, it's fantastic, he lists his relatives, so his wife, and then if we were to go to the next image here, he lists his children, and I think there's even a daughter or two listed there with their married names. So fantastic resources because they were given property by the government, that allotment. Many of them had wills or created wills so that that property remained in their family. So that's a great resource. There's also what you're going to find in the card catalog, lots of little books like this where it's just somebody created a book based on the records that they had researched. This one happens to be the Ward family, right? And so I can come in here and I can look for Timothy Ward, and it will show me here's information about wards who applied to become part of the Cherokee Nation. As a matter of fact, I think this Timothy Ward, his application was rejected, but it lists him and all of his children and why his application was rejected, which at the time was because he didn't have enough Indian blood in him. But what that leads us to know then is that he did have some, right? And so you're on the right track as you go through that. So sometimes you come across little gems like this, and there are several of them in that card catalog. That is about all we have time for today. It always just seems to go so fast, doesn't it? But one of the things that I just want to remind you of again is start with what you know and work your way back. Become familiar with the different tribes in the areas where your family lived, and then you can start looking at the different records that are available for those particular tribes. Keep those questions coming. We're getting great questions, and I know both Ann and I enjoy reading through them and brainstorming ideas for how to put together presentations that'll help you. Hopefully you find these helpful. If you do, leave a comment or send us an email, both about what you like and what you don't like and what your additional questions are, so that we can continue to answer them every week. Hope everybody has a fantastic week and have fun climbing your family tree, no matter which direction you're going.